What's up guys, Manny here, welcome back to another probably longer video. Therefore here are some time-stamped chapters for you content skipping heretics in the description and here on screen. Recently I climbed my first 8C+, a route called Modeselektor in a crag called Pegauer Wand near Graz in Styria. This was the second ascent I think after Armin Buchreutner back in 2010, and it's kind of a deal for me as it marks my departure from a 3-year plateau. I climbed my first 8C back in 2016, a route called Selbst ist das Kind, in an area called Adlisgräben to the south of Vienna, which is documented on this channel as well actually. And in the period until now, I did another 6 8Cs, 2 of which seemed very challenging to me and maybe close to the borderline of 8C+, 2 first ascents actually of tough combinations of already existing routes. And that gave me the impression that I could be capable, of eventually climbing the grade at some point. Now with Modeselektor I'm pretty sure about the grade, and I will also try to explain why later. My plan for this video is to go into detail on how I could actually climb the thing, as the title says pretty much, trying to shine a bit of light onto what actually goes into an ascent like this, and if it is at the limit of the climber, hopefully opposing to the modern approach of just dropping the success story and not really providing any background, which sometimes creates the impression that it's nothing special, quote unquote. I think it's okay to admit struggles and efforts with projects, and I think for the most people actually hearing about these things and how they were overcome is more motivating than just a dry success story. Anyway, in this episode, part 1, we firstly will take a look at the route itself and analyze it to find out what it demands from the climber, to then look at project-specific training to acquire these capabilities. And once we're fit enough, it's time for part 2, in which I'll go through conditioning, achieving perfect inner conditions, essentially diet and some other little tricks, as well as outer conditions, season and weather planning and all that. And standing strategy at the crag, which is very important as well. How I paced my attempts and so on. So if you're a geek when it comes to fine-tuning basically everything to your advantage when it comes to climbing performance, essentially, these episodes could be interesting for you. It's kind of a mission 8C+ in hindsight. Enough intro, let's check out the route, shall we? Here's some footage from a warm-up go from a perspective where you can actually see what's going on, hopefully. One challenging property of this climb is that it starts off extremely harsh, full force ahead super quickly. During the first 20 seconds you have to complete what could be an 8A boulder on its own. There's pretty much no chance to clip whatsoever until this sequence is completed, which is why the first 2 bolts have to be pre-clipped. There is another variation of the climb, which is just the boulder and then straight up afterwards. It's called Kirikou and graded solid 8B+. I red pointed this back in autumn 2018, so to be exact, that's actually when the journey with this 8C+ here started. Now I remember it took me some 3 or 4 sessions to find my solution and actually do all the single moves of just this starting boulder. And when I stuck the dyno for the first time from the ground, I sent the whole thing straight away. So yeah, that one is really just about this boulder. It should also be mentioned that some holds on this first sequence are modified / sick-cut, to make it more climbable essentially, which is not so in line with modern rock ethics, where the goal is to find a solution predetermined by rock completely. However, it is questionable if the climb was even possible otherwise, as we will see. So first of all, we have 2 big moves which make you gain a bit of height and momentum. And the third move requires locking off a shallow 3-finger edge plus thumb with right to enter a small bad downward gaston with left. Now some delicate stepping and matching with right close by on a bad crimp, just good enough to turn the left hand gaston around into very, very bad undercling. These moves, although not exactly paradise on earth, are quite doable. The challenge is here to get the left hand perfectly sorted into that undercling, to be able to perform the next move relatively controlled. Now straight into crux number 1, some delicate stepping again, allowing for a slight drop knee, then bump right hand onto this sharp, bad, strange pinch in the roof, which you have to hit just perfectly with all 4 fingers plus thumb in order to stick it and squeeze the juice out of it. If you stick it though, you can readjust your fingers by activating the bicep of Zeus on that bad undercling. The hold is a bit L-shaped, which requires your middle finger camp to be split apart from your ring finger camp in an alien grip-like fashion, and given that the move almost has to be done dynamically, except if you're, Zeus, It makes this hold very challenging to hit properly. Having the undercling from before with left perfectly will increase chances greatly, because it decreases the speed with which you arrive at that strange pinch. Now some more delicate stepping and then the dyno. This is essentially a super quick catch with the left hand from one hold to the next, since most of the weight is carried by the left hand before and after the move. And it causes a major swing out, since we are now moving from overhanging terrain into the roof section. The target hold is pretty good though. It's a very artificial Sika horn without which the climb would be either impossible or super hard. It bites into the skin like an alligator if you hit it properly. But hitting it properly is quite a challenge, since you arrive there with a lot of speed and the alligator doesn't have his mouth wide open, if you know what I mean. To add a bit of mental spice to this move, the dyno is not only a challenge for the climber but also for the belayer. Giving out just enough rope to allow for a proper swing out, but not too much to prevent a grounder in case you're not sticking it, is tough and requires some experimenting at first. Another factor adding to the general difficulty of projecting your route: you cannot be belayed by everyone. Anyone who's up for belaying red point attempts on this thing needs to be instructed first and then needs to do some experimenting to figure out the right amount of slack in the right moment. Probably a good opportunity to thank all the patient and very good belayers I had on this thing. They did a great job, thanks. So that's the first boulder in short. It contains for me the hardest single moves of the route, the Zeus undercling move and the alligator dyno, around 8A in total I guess. Especially if the dyno is belayed properly to avoid any rope drag, which would help sticking it. This was also the more artificial part of the route. Now we're moving on into more natural terrain, which contains some very epic sequences. Swinging back to the wall like a sultan, hopefully hitting an okay foothold at some point to get the first clip in. Now big body strength move onto small but good slot with right. Then letting go, making space with left to place left foot, clip, this time from the right hand, taking a bit of pressure away from the left hand, but at the same time pumping up the right hand, then matching, and a sketchy dynamic move into the next slot with the right actually, which is not actually that hard, but bears falling potential if your upper body is already screaming for rest, And then stepping right and doing this cool flag to get the next clip in with left from the right hand, pumping up the right hand, like a rubber boat essentially. Now matching, stepping left, releasing right foot, beautiful drop knee, which by the way goes to show that these simple techniques have relevance even in hardcore roof climbing. And huge lock off into an invisible hard to hit overhead slot crimp with left, entering crux number 2. On this move, although not being the hardest of the second crux, I lost a lot of attempts. The problem is that all the roof work from before with clipping and so on really destroys your whole upper body essentially, and it's just so hard to explode one more time after that. And if you're sloppy, you just won't hit that slot crimp properly, which is definitely necessary to do the next move. It wasn't until I developed a proper shaking strategy that I arrived at this move at just the right pace and freshness to be able to stick it from the ground. So yeah, let's get the pumpometer out, I would say. Link in description. No, just kidding. Only I can use it. I patented it a long time ago, actually. The first boulder goes down so quickly and you have just such short holding times. There are no clips and no chalk ups involved. Actually, there were no chalk ups in the whole route for me. If you paid attention on the sand, you might have noticed it. I just carried the bag up in case I would fall again and have to brush some holes and stuff. Anyway, it doesn't really cost a lot of energy to power through this first sequence, although it contains the hardest single moves, ironically. But once in the roof, doing that first clip, it starts to get pumpy, rubber boat style. First clipping from left, then after the next move from right, and later on from the right again, after an especially costly negative, letting your body sink into that second roof slot right before crux number 2. Also, there's absolutely no way to get anything back for right once you're leaving the target hold of crux number 1 behind, which leaves the right hand a bit sad on this lock-off, To counteract this circumstance, I implemented some proper shaking seconds after the first clip, before powering on into the roof. It's quite tempting to rush, like a little girl to the petting zoo, and you don't want to waste down your left hand while shaking, but just these few seconds of shaking the right hand gave it back enough freshness to stick this crucial lock-off move a couple of meters later. Now what you get as a reward is a sharp, small, impossible to hit properly due to its invisibility slot crimp, which you have to crank down like a vice, followed by a quick foot switch to get your left foot matching your right hand, allowing for a flag which is almost as beautiful as it is effective, and as soon as you feel you can lift off the right hand, slapping to the right like an offended gender equality protester onto a bad undercling side pull crimp. Now, one flexibility demanding bad greasy foothold on the right, making use of right foot again, allowing for another move with the left hand onto a super bad, this time round crimp, which becomes quite okay actually once the following delicate, again flexibility demanding stepping is completed. As you can see, the right foot ends up far on the right on a quite good foothold this time, transforming this round crimp on the left into a Gaston, which can now be locked down big time to reach a sharp side pull edge with right, good enough to perform the next clip again from the right hand, pumping it up even more. This was the second crux of the route, from the OK slot down in the roof to this clip, 4 moves which could check in around 7B+/C boulder on its own, and including the upcoming 4 moves it would easily, quite easily become 7C boulder I think. And this pretty much makes the 8C+ great. If I imagine there would be quote-unquote normal climbing, not jug shaking, but let's say power endurance 8A, into just this second crux, it would probably already be 8C in total. Given that we're starting on what could be an 8A boulder, which would on its own translate into 8B+ for something already, the whole thing becomes 8C+ quite easily I think. And so much for my thoughts on the grade and stuff. It's not over yet though. Now we're connecting this climb into the exit of an 8A which comes from the right side of the cave, essentially grabbing its footholds as handholds first, and to then do some identical moves until arriving at its anchor. Big move left hand onto small foothold crimp, then very high right foot, very low left foot actually, locking off to allow for a short right hand shakeout before grabbing a very tiny foothold crimp with right. Quick high left foot to be able to grab another foothold crimp with left, now small greasy foothold with right, and the crux move of this sequence, catching another greasy foothold edge with right. Now this very last quite hard move actually led to one more attempt spent. I failed there once coming from the ground, which was very annoying, yet enjoyable at the same time since I never got that far before, and thankfully on the next attempt of that same day, the climbing gods, let me manage to send the route, because after this incident I paid even more attention to keeping my right hand as fresh as possible for that catch. Now you get a pretty good side sloper, allowing you to get another clip in, and from there it's basically the finishing moves of that 8A, which although on greasy holds are quite doable, if you manage to stick the crazy stuff before, you shouldn't drop off there anymore, so to say. So to summarize, we have here a super bouldery climb, starting off with an 8A boulder into pumpy roof without rest into around 7C boulder, and then power endurance to the top. On the ascent it took me around 1 minute 40 seconds to get from the ground into safe zone where falling is relatively unlikely. So pretty much 20 moves actually. All that gives a very clear picture of the characteristics of the route and what it demands from the climber, namely aerobic shakeout knee bar skills like your La Rambla style. Just kidding, we will need mainly boulder power, and a bit of power endurance, a bit of body strength and lock-off power on edges would be useful as well, since we are moving in super steep terrain here. No aerobic shaking and stuff, there's no opportunity to do that anyway. Based on these requirements, I modified my training during the recent more intense projecting phase, which lasted around 4.5 weeks, or to be more exact, 32 days, pretty much a month, and started right after I came back from the little bouldering trip to Albarracin after the first week of October. I did not follow a strict training plan designed in advance, because it's quite hard to do that when you depend on conditions and other people to try your project, and often work irregular, that's what I'm doing recently. Rather, I followed the principle of what I call prioritization. What I mean by that is simply that for any given training day I chose sessions out of a pool of options, depending on assigned priority and current practicability. Outdoor sessions at the crag on the project itself had number one priority, since hardly any training can come close to training on the project itself, learning all its details and tricks, strengthening muscle memory and specific endurance and all that. But of course, this is not so easy to conduct because it requires time, reasonable conditions, and an available partner. Outdoor bouldering sessions had number 2 priority. Quite close to the Modeselektor cave, there is another quite similar cave with some bouldering, so I figured this could be a great training spot to get my max strength on point for this very bouldery project on relatively identical rock, limestone. I've talked up numerous times about the effectivity of outdoor bouldering for outdoor route climbing, hence the quite high priority. Additionally, this second cave is relatively weather independent and you can go there alone and even when it rains, which makes this kind of training more accessible. Indoor bouldering sessions on the Andromeda Wall had number 3 priority. If you have seen my recent Andromeda Wall episode, you already know that I built 2 replica boulders for mimicking Crux 1 and 2 of Modeselektor. I think that creating these boulders and training on them was a crucial part of success actually, because it enabled me to stabilize and even strengthen muscle memory indoors, where training is super accessible because completely independent from conditions, partners and even daylight, which gets shorter and shorter these days. A few words about creating replica boulders might be worth its own video actually. A good system wall will be very helpful for this kind of stuff. Unless you have control over setting the replicas yourself on the go on your own wall somewhere at home or something. I was quite happy to find that I didn't have to set or even turn one single hole on the Andromeda Wall to be able to find similar sequences in similar difficulties for already 3 boulders of outdoor projects of mine. That kind of tells me that the whole diversity and directionality on this thing are well balanced and sufficient, which means I did a decent job with setting it essentially. Enough self-praise. When it comes to difficulty of the replicas, you'd be well advised to actually design them so that they feel a bit harder than the actual project boulders, especially when it comes to the crux moves. For the replica called Selector, Crux number 2, this worked out just perfectly. I think it's a solid 7C+, whereas the actual crux, might be around 7B+/C. The replica called Mode, Crux number 1, turned out similar in total difficulty as the actual starting boulder of the route, with the end dyno being a bit easier than the real dyno, which is not ideal, but what you're gonna do. I think 7C/+ Andromeda grading, which is probably a bit sandbagged anyway. I figured the second crux was more important anyway, since that was the one where I was falling most of the time during end stage projecting, and actually 2 days before sending the route I had an extremely good indoor bouldering session during which I could tick off both replicas. So that was telling me already that I was in good shape, and the conditioning strategy that I was working with, which we will talk about in part number 2, gave me a bit of additional confidence. Back to prioritization. To prepare upper body and finger strength for this rubber boat pumping roof section, I supplemented my training with assisted Beastmaker 1 armors, as I call them, on the small lateral Beastmaker 2000 edges, which had priority number 4 and mostly just served as a means to finish myself off after the end of a training day to earn the upcoming rest day, A while ago I've talked about why I believe that just being able to pull 1 armors won't really do a lot for your climbing performance unless you're able to pull them on freaking bad holes, which got kinda confirmed by this recent training experiment. Again, 2 days before sending the project I managed to pull a 1 armor on the middle Beastmaker 2000 edge for the first time in my life. Without a doubt, this was not only due to strength gains, but also maybe even more so due to the effects of conditioning, which already started showing. But again, this gave me even more confidence for the upcoming outdoor session, which should turn out to be sanding day. And priority number 5 goes to core training and antagonistic exercise, which essentially contained my calisthenics triangle routine of handstand push-ups, front lever and planche attempts. Now this was just to fill up gaps on days with multiple sessions, or when nothing else was to do essentially, when fingers were already sore before or even during a rest day. I actually didn't want to do too much of it because it tends to put on muscle on my upper body quite quickly and thereby increases body weight without adding much to climbing performance. However, during an intense period of training like this, it doesn't hurt to get a bit of antagonistic stuff as well. And who knows, maybe it played its role in staying injury-free during the whole process, Alright, now the question, given these circumstances and priorities, how much of each training did I get during this projecting month? Revisiting my Tooth Fairy training diary revealed that I got 8 outdoor sessions on Modeselektor itself. On the 8th session I sent the route 3 outdoor bouldering sessions in the nearby cave on similar rock, 8 indoor bouldering sessions, 6 of which on the replicas on the Andromeda wall, 5 assisted One Armor Beastmaker 2000 sessions, and 5 core/antagonist sessions. That's 29 project-specific sessions in total in 32 days of projecting, pretty much a session a day on average, not counting outdoor days on other crags or indoor sessions on other bouldering and all the like, which were comparably few though, and almost negligible, I think. Multiple sessions a day occurred quite frequently and again followed the principle of prioritization. Higher priority sessions had precedence. I had 6 total rest days during this month, 2 of which back-to-back to at one point allow for a bit deeper recovery, and usually I tried to place rest days in front of outdoor days on the project to be more or less recovered when attacking. However, the day before sanding day I had a pretty intense core session and I was still a bit sore in the fingers as well from a previous intense training day, which goes to show that current restedness is a much less important factor for on-day performance than inner and outer conditions. This is something that I detected quite a long time ago for myself at least. In other words, do not let go of an otherwise perfect day just because you're not 100% rested. In fact, it might even increase sanding chances for some climbers who struggle with psychological problems if they prepare too much, quote-unquote, for a project, as then something called fear of success and the associated nervousness comes into play, both of which are mitigated if you can tell yourself, I'm not even fully recovered, so who cares about the outcome today anyway. The crazy thing is that even this much training can only do relatively little for your chances of success if you're climbing at your true limit. I mean, obviously you have to get it done if you want to optimize sanding chances, but the closer you climb at your limit, the greater the impact of something called conditioning becomes on your success rate. Strictly speaking, training is a form of conditioning as well. However, usually the athletic community means something different when they talk about it. Now, doing all this training without paying attention to conditioning at this point is pointless. I would rather skip all the training and just do the conditioning part, to be honest, if I would have to choose between the two. Now this, as well as my personal conditioning strategy for this first 8C+, I will talk about in part 2 of this Mission 8C+ in hindsight. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know down below if you did, and drop a like, that helps a lot as you know. I'll be back soon with part 2. Keep crushing and I'll see you soon. Bye.